They said justice was served. They said the guilty paid the price. But what if I told you? Everything you've been told is a lie. The real criminal walks free, and the victim, buried in silence. Who is truly behind this injustice? Stay, and you'll uncover the truth they don't want you to know. Mexico, 1998. The air in San Esteban was thick with dust and whispers that could build a person up just as quickly as they could bury them. It was the kind of town where people prayed in church on Sundays, but crucified sinners on Mondays. Honor meant everything. Reputation was currency. And a woman's virtue? That was the highest-priced commodity. At just 16, Camila Rios had learned this lesson the hard way. She had once believed her future was her own. She had dreams of leaving San Esteban, of seeing the ocean, of becoming someone beyond a daughter, beyond a wife. But in this town, dreams like that were dangerous. Women were meant to be silent, obedient, untouched, and if they weren't, well, the town knew exactly how to deal with them. Camila had a secret growing inside of her. She had been terrified the first time she felt it flutter, a tiny movement deep inside, proof that life was forming within her. She had pressed a shaking hand to her belly, whispering to herself, "This is real. This is happening." But there was no excitement, no joy, only fear. Because in San Esteban, a girl like her didn't get to make mistakes. She had gone to her mother first, because wasn't that what daughters did? They turned to their mothers for comfort, for guidance, for love. But Valeria Rios was not that kind of mother. When Camila whispered the truth, voice trembling, her mother's hand struck her face before she could even finish the sentence. "You disgrace me." Valeria's voice was sharp, filled with something colder than anger, shame. Camila's cheeks stung, but her heart hurt more. "Mama, please." She tried, tears spilling down her face. But Valeria only stepped back, her gaze as sharp as a blade. "You have ruined us. You have ruined yourself. And you will pay for it." Camila couldn't breathe. Her father had died years ago, leaving them under the roof of another man, Ignacio Rios, her stepfather. She turned to him now, searching his face for anything that might mean safety. But he said nothing. He simply watched. And something in the way he watched her, the way his eyes darkened, the way his fingers tapped against the wooden table made her skin crawl. "Please," she whispered again. Silence. And in that silence, she knew. She had no one. By the next morning, the whole town knew. It spread like wildfire, burning faster than Camila could run. Women whispered behind their hands. Men sneered when they passed. The church bells rang, but Camila felt like they were tolling for her funeral, not salvation. She wasn't Camila Rios, the butcher's daughter, anymore. She was Camila, the girl who had sinned. And sinners didn't get to choose their own fate. The whispers didn't fade. They grew louder, hungrier. San Esteban had a way of feeding off scandal, like vultures circling a dying body. But this wasn't just gossip. This was a verdict. Camila had disgraced her family, and in a town like this, there was only one way to restore honor: marriage. Her mother decided quickly, too quickly, that Camila would marry Mateo Vargas. Mateo was 26, a man with broad shoulders, rough hands, and a reputation that made young girls lower their eyes when he walked by. He wasn't handsome, he wasn't kind, he wasn't even particularly wealthy, but he was a man, and in San Esteban, that was enough. "It's settled," Valeria said one evening, her voice as flat as the cold soup on the table. "The wedding is in 2 weeks." Camila felt like the room had been sucked empty of air. "No," she whispered. Valeria didn't even look up. "This isn't a choice, Camila. This is the only way to fix what you've done." "Fix?" Camila's voice cracked. "You think marrying me off to some man I don't even know will fix this?" Valeria's gaze was like stone, unmovable, indifferent. "Better a wife than a whore," she said simply. That night, Camila tried to run. She knew she had no money, no plan, nowhere to go, but she couldn't stay. Not when every breath in this house felt like poison. She had just made it to the front door when a voice slithered into the darkness. "Going somewhere?" She froze. Ignacio stepped from the shadows, his face hidden in the dim candlelight. He was smiling. "You really think you can just walk away from this?" he murmured, stepping closer. Camila's heartbeat pounded in her ears. Please. Her voice was barely a whisper. He reached out, tucking a strand of her hair behind her ear. She flinched, but he only laughed. Be a good girl, Camila, he said softly, or you'll never see the sun again. Her skin went cold. And just like that, she knew she would never make it out of this town alive. There was only one person left who might help her, Sister Clara. The next day, Camila slipped out while Valeria was at the market. She ran to the small stone church at the edge of town, her chest heaving, her hands trembling. Sister Clara had always been kind. She had given Camila bread when her family had no food, let her sit in the quiet of the chapel when the world outside felt too loud. Please, help me, Camila gasped as she reached the church. The nun's face was etched with concern as she pulled Camila inside, closing the door firmly behind them. What's happened? She asked. Camila's voice broke as she told her everything: the baby, the wedding, Ignacio's threats. Sister Clara's eyes darkened. We have to get you out of here. Relief flooded Camila's chest. But before she could say another word, the church doors slammed open. Valeria stood there. Behind her, Mateo, Ignacio, two men from the town. Camila's breath caught in her throat. Mama, please. Enough, Valeria snapped. Come home. Now. Camila fought. She screamed. She begged. None of it mattered. They dragged her home like an animal to the slaughterhouse. That night, she was locked in her room. No food, no water, no way out. From the other side of the door, her mother's voice came, calm and cruel. The next time you leave this house, it will be as Mateo's wife. And then, silence. The days leading up to the wedding felt like a slow execution. Camila was a prisoner in her own home, locked behind a wooden door that smelled of damp and rot. Food was scarce, water was rationed, and the air felt thinner each day. Her mother never visited. Neither did Ignacio. The only voices she heard were the townswomen whispering outside her window, some pitying her, most condemning her. A girl like that. She deserves whatever comes to her. At least Mateo is willing to take her. She should be grateful, grateful. They wanted her to thank them for selling her off like a cow at market. But Camila had already decided something. She would not be grateful. She would not go quietly. On the fifth night, when even the moon seemed to hide behind the clouds, Sister Clara came back. Camila woke to the sound of a soft knock against her window. She rushed over, pressing her face to the wooden slats. Sister, she whispered. The nun's worn hands pushed a small bundle through the gaps. Camila unwrapped it quickly: a bottle, a strip of fabric, and a piece of parchment. It's a test, Sister Clara whispered. A test to prove the father of your child. Camila's stomach clenched. The father. She had never spoken his name, had never dared to say it out loud. But she knew. And so did Sister Clara. If we have proof, we can stop this, the nun urged. We can take it to the police. For the first time in weeks, Camila let herself feel hope. She reached through the slats, grasping Sister Clara's hands. Do it, she whispered. The nun nodded once. Then she was gone. The next day, Ignacio left the house early, his boots clicking against the stone path. Sister Clara was waiting. She had watched him for weeks, waiting for the right moment. When she saw him enter the town's small cantina, she moved quickly. A few strands of hair from his comb, a napkin he had wiped his mouth on. It was all she needed. She took the samples to a friend in the next town, someone who owed her a favor, someone who knew how to keep quiet, and then she waited. 4 days later, the paper arrived. A simple white envelope, tucked into the folds of Sister Clara's robe. She unfolded it, her fingers trembling. She read the words once, twice, and then she ran. She didn't knock when she reached Camila's house. She didn't care if the whole town heard her footsteps pounding against the dirt. She slammed the door open and locked eyes with Valeria. You knew, Clara gasped. You knew this whole time. Valeria's expression didn't change. I don't know what you're talking about. Sister Clara held up the paper, shaking with rage. Ignacio is the father of Camila's child. A moment of absolute silence. Then, Camila gasped from behind the door. No, she whispered. Valeria snatched the paper from Clara's hands, crumpling it before throwing it into the fire. The flames devoured the truth in seconds. You will leave now, she said, voice like ice. But Sister Clara didn't move. "You would rather let your daughter suffer than face what he did to her?" she demanded. "You would protect that monster?" Valeria's fingers curled into fists. "He is the only man keeping this family alive," she spat. "Without him, we have nothing." "You have nothing already," Clara shot back. Valeria's face twisted in fury. She stepped forward, raising a hand, but before she could strike, a deep voice cut through the air. "What's going on here?" The room froze. Ignacio. He stood in the doorway, his eyes darting between the two women. Then, slowly, he smiled. "Ah," he murmured, gazing at Sister Clara with amusement. "You found out." He wasn't even surprised. Sister Clara's skin crawled as Ignacio stepped closer. "You think you can change anything," he said softly. "You think anyone will believe a nun over me?" Clara stood her ground. "I have the test results," Ignacio chuckled. "Do you?" he asked, glancing at the fireplace, where the evidence had already turned to ash. Sister Clara's stomach dropped. "You think that piece of paper is the only proof?" she whispered. For the first time, Ignacio faltered. A single second of hesitation, but Clara saw it. "You can burn a page," she said, "but the truth is still the truth." A flicker of something dangerous passed through Ignacio's eyes, and then he moved. Before Sister Clara could react, he grabbed her wrist and twisted it violently. She cried out, stumbling back, but he caught her by the throat. "You should have kept your nose out of this," he hissed. The last thing she saw was Valeria, standing still, watching, saying nothing. Then, a sharp pain, a blur of headlights, the sound of screeching tires. And then, nothing. The town called it an accident. She wasn't watching the road. She must have tripped. Such a tragedy. But Camila knew the truth. Sister Clara had died for her, and no one was going to save her now. The wedding day arrived like a death sentence. The church bells tolled in the distance, their echoes low and haunting, as if mourning something already lost. Inside the small house, Camila stood before the mirror, drowning in layers of white lace. A veil covered her face, but it could not hide the hollowness in her eyes. Her mother stood behind her, adjusting the dress with cold precision. "You look beautiful," Valeria murmured. Camila didn't answer. There was nothing beautiful about a bride being led to the altar like a lamb to slaughter. The streets of San Esteban were lined with people. Women watched with silent judgment, men with unspoken amusement. Children peeked out from behind their mothers' skirts, too young to understand the weight of what was happening. Camila's feet felt like lead as she walked beside her mother. Each step was one step closer to a future she couldn't escape. Ahead, the church doors yawned open, waiting to swallow her whole. Inside, Mateo stood at the altar, his expression unreadable. Was he nervous? Excited? Indifferent? Camila didn't care, because in that moment, none of it mattered. The priest's voice droned on, but Camila barely heard him. Her head buzzed with thoughts, with memories, with the ghost of Sister Clara's voice whispering, "We can stop this." But Clara was dead, and Camila was alone. The priest turned to her, his voice breaking through the fog. "Do you, Camila Rios, take this man to be your husband?" The world held its breath. Her mother's grip on her wrist tightened. Ignacio watched from the front row, calm, confident, victorious. For a moment, Camila nearly gave in. She could feel the weight of their expectations pressing against her chest, forcing the word to her lips. "I." Bang! The doors of the church burst open. The gasp of the crowd filled the air. A man in uniform strode inside, his boots echoing against the stone floor. In his hand, a crumpled document stained with blood. The words shattered the silence. Ignacio stiffened, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the wooden pew. The officer lifted the document for all to see. "This is proof that Ignacio Rios is the father of Camila Rios's unborn child." The room erupted. Women gasped, men murmured. Mateo stumbled back, as if the altar beneath him had suddenly turned to fire. "And Valeria," Valeria screamed. "Lies!" she shrieked. "This is all lies." But the evidence was there. And the same town that had condemned Camila so quickly, now turned their attention to Ignacio. Because a girl losing her virtue was a crime in their eyes. But a man violating his own stepdaughter, that was something even they could not ignore. The officer stepped forward, pulling a pair of iron cuffs from his belt. "Ignacio Rios, you are under arrest." For the first time, Fear flickered in Ignacio's eyes. He turned to Valeria, expecting her to defend him, but she did nothing. She simply stood there, her hands shaking, her lips parted in horror. Camila watched as the man who had stolen her childhood was dragged away, the iron clinking like a funeral bell. People in the crowd whispered. Some turned away in disgust. Others stared. And Camila breathed. For the first time in weeks, she let herself breathe. But it wasn't over. Because as soon as Ignacio was gone, Valeria turned on her daughter. You did this, she hissed. You ruined us. Camila flinched, but she didn't back down. No, Mama, she said, her voice steady for the first time. You ruined yourself. The crowd stirred. And then, a stone flew. It struck Camila's shoulder, sharp and sudden. She stumbled. Another one followed, and then another. The town had turned again. Because if Ignacio was a monster, then Camila was the girl who let it happen. And in San Esteban, a girl like that was just as guilty as the man who hurt her. Strong hands grabbed Camila's arms, pulling her away from the church, away from her mother's screaming curses, away from the townspeople's spitting rage. She barely registered who was holding her, where they were taking her, until she saw the towering stone walls of the convent. The door creaked open. A nun stood in the shadows. Take her, a voice ordered. Camila fought. No, please. But the door slammed shut, locked, sealed, final. And just like that, she was gone. The convent was cold, quiet, suffocating, a place where the world forgot about the women it didn't want to remember. For 10 years, Camila Rios was one of them. She was no longer the girl who walked down the aisle in a dress she didn't choose. No longer the girl who had cried for help in a town that had already decided her fate. She was a shadow, a name whispered only in hushed voices, a ghost locked behind stone walls. And yet she was still alive, and that meant something. The days inside the convent bled together like ink on damp paper. She woke before dawn. She prayed. She worked. She kept her head down, because speaking out had only ever brought her pain. Outside, San Esteban moved on without her. Ignacio's trial had been short and quiet, too quiet. He was convicted, but with money and influence, his punishment was little more than a slap on the wrist. By the time Camila had spent a year in the convent, Ignacio was already a free man. By the time she had spent 5, he had built his life back, living as if nothing had ever happened. By the time she had spent 10, he was still breathing, thriving, existing while she had been erased, but not forgotten. Because one day, a letter arrived. And it changed everything. The paper was thin, yellowed at the edges, as if time itself had worn it down. Camila recognized the handwriting instantly. Her mother's. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the letter. Camila, it began. If you are reading this, then I am already gone. She exhaled sharply. Dead. But Valeria was dead. I have never been a good mother. I have never been a good woman. I have spent my life living in fear of shame, of poverty, of the truth. And because of that fear, I let you suffer for sins that were never yours to bear. Camila's heart pounded. I knew what Ignacio did to you. The words burned. I knew, and I let it happen. Because without him, we would have had nothing. I chose survival over justice. And that is the choice that will damn me. Tears blurred the ink. I am sorry. The letter ended there. No redemption. No forgiveness asked. Just regret, too little and too late. Camila's hands curled into fists. Her mother was gone. Ignacio was free. And she was still here, breathing, waiting. For what? The answer came that night, when she packed her things, walked to the door, and stepped into the world she had been forced to leave behind. San Esteban was the same, but Camila was not. The streets hadn't forgotten her, but they no longer knew who they were looking at. The whispers followed her like ghosts, but this time, she did not lower her eyes. She walked through the market, past the church, past the home she had once lived in, until she reached a house on the hill. His house, Ignacio Rios. The door was unlocked, because why would a man like him fear anything? She stepped inside. The house smelled the same tobacco, leather, whiskey, the scent of a man who had stolen so much from her. And there he was, sitting in an armchair, glass in hand, older, grayer, but still the same monster. His eyes met hers, and for a moment, He didn't react. Then, well, he smirked. Look who's come home. Camila didn't speak. She just raised the gun. The smirk vanished. What are you doing? Ignacio asked, slowly setting the glass down. Something I should have done a long time ago. His laugh was sharp, cold, amused. And then what, Camila? You think that pulling a trigger will bring you peace? She didn't answer. Because peace wasn't what she wanted. She wanted justice. She wanted an ending. She closed her eyes, exhaled, and pulled the trigger. The sound echoed through the house, through the town, through the 10 years of silence that had buried her. And then, nothing. Just smoke curling from the barrel, just the weight of her own breath. She opened her eyes and saw him on the floor, still, not breathing, not smiling, not anything anymore. A monster finally put to rest. Camila lowered the gun, her hands steady, her heart calm. For the first time in her life, she had taken control. For the first time, she was free. She turned, walked out the door, and never looked back. Justice delayed is justice denied. But what happens when justice never comes? This story reminds us that silence protects the oppressor, not the victim. The question is, how long will we let it continue? Speak up, stand up, because if we don't fight for justice, who will? This isn't just a story, it's reality for too many people. What do you think? Was justice truly served, or was it just another cycle of vengeance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If you were in Camila's shoes, would you have done the same, or was there another way? Let's talk about it below. Tag someone who needs to hear this story because silence is what lets injustice thrive.